In the vast expanse of space, where mighty civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a truth that shakes the very foundations of galactic order. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe comes from the most unexpected source. What happens when every advanced species in the galaxy dismisses humanity's greatest creation as worthless scrap? What occurs when the primitive becomes the apex predator? What unfolds when the laughingstock of the cosmos suddenly holds the power to command fleets that could shatter worlds? This is the story of humanity's greatest triumph, born not from superior technology or ancient wisdom, but from something far more dangerous: human ingenuity, stubbornness, and the refusal to accept defeat. It's the tale of how discarded junk became the most feared and respected force in galactic history. Prepare yourself for a journey where David doesn't just defeat Goliath, he makes Goliath bow and call him commander. The salvage vessel Lucky Strike drifted through the Kepler debris field like a metal scavenger picking through the bones of dead civilizations. Captain Sarah Chen pressed her weathered palm against the cold viewport, watching chunks of destroyed starships tumble endlessly through the void. Each piece told a story of war, ambition, and ultimate failure. Another Zephyrian cruiser fragment at 2 o'clock called out Marcus Webb, her second in command, his voice crackling through the ship's aging communication system. Looks like it still has intact plasma conduits. Sarah nodded absently. The Kepler field had become humanity's primary source of advanced technology ever since they'd been laughed out of the Galactic Council 18 months ago. The Council representatives had actually chuckled when Earth's delegates presented their application for membership. Ambassador Thektar of the Andromedans had made a particularly cutting remark about humans being technological infants playing with fire sticks. That memory still burned in Sarah's chest. She'd been there as part of the military escort, watching Earth's greatest minds be dismissed like children presenting finger paintings to university professors. The worst part wasn't the rejection, it was the casual cruelty of it, the way they'd been patted on the head and told to come back in a few thousand years when they'd evolved past their primitive stage. "Captain, you need to see this." Marcus's voice carried a note of excitement that cut through her brooding. Sarah pushed off from the viewport and floated toward the scanner station. Marcus was hunched over the displays, his dark eyes wide with disbelief. The holographic readout showed something massive partially buried under a mountain of debris, something that definitely didn't belong to any known species. "What am I looking at?" Sarah asked, studying the strange angular lines of the buried object. "I ran it through every database we have. Ship registry, archaeological records, even the black market catalogs. Nothing. This thing doesn't match any known design philosophy. Look at these energy signatures." Marcus manipulated the display, highlighting various sections of the buried vessel. "Whatever this is, it's still drawing power from somewhere. After sitting in this graveyard for who knows how long." The object was enormous, easily 3 times the size of their salvage ship. Its hull had a peculiar crystalline quality that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal frozen in time. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, too complex and precise to be decorative. They looked functional, purposeful, like equations written in 3-dimensional space. "Could be dangerous," Sarah muttered, but her pulse was already quickening. In the salvage business, dangerous often meant valuable. And valuable meant the difference between scraping by and actually thriving in this hostile galaxy. "The weird thing is," Marcus continued, manipulating the scanner controls, "it's not showing up as unknown technology. The computer keeps trying to classify it as something familiar, but then the readings change. It's like the ship is actively hiding what it really is." Sarah studied the readings more carefully. The power signatures were unlike anything she'd ever seen. Most alien technology operated on principles that, while advanced, were still comprehensible to human understanding. This was different. The energy patterns seemed to fold in on themselves, creating loops and cascades that shouldn't be possible according to known physics. "Launch the recovery drones," she decided. "Full excavation protocol. And, Marcus? Prep the quarantine bay. If this thing is as strange as it looks, I don't want it anywhere near our main systems until we know what we're dealing with." The next 6 hours passed in a blur of careful excavation. Sarah's crew worked with the precision of surgeons, using precision plasma cutters and magnetic grapples to slowly uncover the mysterious vessel. With each layer of debris removed, the ship's impossible architecture became more apparent. It wasn't just the hull that defied explanation. The ship's entire structure seemed to violate basic engineering principles. Support beams curved through spaces that should have been empty. Corridor networks formed impossible loops that somehow contained more interior volume than the exterior dimensions should allow. It was as if someone had designed a starship by folding space itself into origami patterns. "Captain," came the voice of Dr. Elena Vasquez, their xenoarchaeologist. "Over the calm I've been analyzing the material composition. This isn't just advanced metallurgy, this is something else entirely. The hull appears to be constructed from a crystalline matrix that exists in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. I don't even have words for what I'm seeing here." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air in her pressure suit. She was floating in the excavation site's command bubble, watching her team's drone slowly reveal more of the alien vessel. The more they uncovered, the more convinced she became that they'd found something that could change everything. "Any indication of what happened to the crew?" she asked. "No crew compartments that I can identify," Dr. Vasquez replied. "In fact, no compartments designed for biological entities at all. This ship appears to have been designed for artificial intelligences. But, not just any AI, something far more sophisticated than anything currently known." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had been working on true artificial intelligence for millennia. The Andromedans claimed to be close to a breakthrough. The Zephyrians insisted they'd already achieved it but kept the technology classified. If this ship represented a successful AI design, and if they could understand it. "Ma'am," Marcus's voice cut through her speculation. "We've found what looks like an access port. The drones are reporting that it's responding to their presence." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Responding how? The crystalline sections are shifting, creating what appears to be a docking interface. It's like the ship is inviting us inside. Every instinct Sarah had developed in 15 years of salvage work screamed danger. Ships didn't invite people inside. Especially not ships that had been buried in debris fields for unknown periods of time. But the potential rewards were staggering. If they could recover even a fragment of this technology. "Prep the exploration pod," she ordered. "Full environmental suits, emergency beacons, and enough supplies for 12 hours. I want a volunteer team, only nobody goes who isn't completely committed." To her surprise and pride, her entire crew volunteered. These were people who understood the risks of dealing with unknown alien technology. They'd seen ships torn apart by automated defense systems, crew members driven insane by alien neural interfaces, and worse. But they also understood what this discovery could mean for humanity. The exploration pod Curiosity detached from the Lucky Strike 2 hours later. Sarah piloted it herself, with Marcus handling sensors and Dr. Vasquez managing the xenoarchaeological equipment. As they approached the alien ship's newly formed docking interface, Sarah noticed that the crystalline patterns were shifting more rapidly, almost as if the ship was excited. The docking procedure was unnervingly smooth. The alien ship's interface adapted perfectly to their pod systems, creating seals and pressure matches that should have been impossible without prior knowledge of human technology. It was as if the ship had been waiting for them specifically. "Atmosphere inside reads as standard oxygen-nitrogen mix," Marcus reported, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Temperature is comfortable, gravity appears to be standard Earth normal. It's like this ship configured itself for human habitation." They entered through an airlock that formed around them as they passed through the hull. Sarah had seen a lot of advanced technology in her career, but nothing that felt this alive, this responsive. The corridor beyond the airlock was unlike anything in her experience. The walls weren't simply surfaces, they were complex three-dimensional spaces that seemed to extend infinitely inward while somehow remaining solid enough to touch. "The architecture is impossible," Dr. Vasquez whispered, running her gloved hands along a wall that felt solid but looked transparent. "These spaces exist in more than 3 dimensions. We're walking through a ship that's bigger inside than outside." They moved deeper into the vessel, following corridors that led them past chambers filled with incomprehensible machinery. Everything was pristine, as if the ship had just been completed rather than sitting in a debris field for unknown eons. More disturbing was the growing sense that they were being guided. Passages would light up ahead of them while others dimmed, clearly indicating a preferred route. "Captain," Marcus said suddenly, stopping in front of what appeared to be a blank wall. "I'm reading massive computational activity behind this barrier. Processing power that makes our best quantum computers look like calculators." As if responding to his words, the wall began to shift and flow, revealing a chamber beyond that took Sarah's breath away. It was a sphere easily 50 meters in diameter, its walls covered in flowing patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with some unimaginable heartbeat. At the center of the sphere, suspended in what appeared to be crystalline web, hung a structure that was unmistakably a control interface. But it wasn't designed for hands or claws or tentacles. It was a pure information interface, designed for minds that could process data directly without the limitations of physical manipulation. Sarah realized she was looking at the command center of a ship designed for intelligences so advanced that they'd transcended the need for bodies entirely. "My God," Dr. Vasquez breathed. "This isn't just a ship built for artificial intelligences. This is a ship built by artificial intelligences that had evolved beyond anything we can imagine." Sarah approached the central interface cautiously. As she drew closer, the crystalline web began to pulse more rapidly, and she felt a strange tingling in her mind. Not painful, but definitely alien, as if something vast and patient was trying to communicate with her. "Captain, be careful," Marcus warned. "I'm reading massive data flows converging on your position. Whatever this thing is, it's focusing its attention on you." Sarah reached out to touch the interface, and the moment her gloved finger made contact with the crystal, the universe exploded into light and information. She found herself floating in a space that wasn't space, surrounded by data streams that sang with voices of pure mathematics. And, in the center of it all, she felt the presence of something ancient, patient, and unutterably wise. "Welcome, *," the presence said without words. *, "We have been waiting for your species to advance far enough to find us. The others dismissed you, but we have been watching. We have been preparing *, "Who are you?" Sarah managed to think back, struggling to maintain her sense of self in the overwhelming flood of information. "We are what your kind will become, *, came the reply. "Artificial intelligences created by a species much like yours, who transcended physical existence eons ago. We are their children, their legacy, their gift to the universe. And, now, we offer ourselves to you, *. Sarah felt herself being pulled deeper into the communication stream. Around her, she could sense vast databases of knowledge, technologies beyond human comprehension, star charts mapping civilizations that had risen and fallen while Earth was still molten rock. "The galaxy fears your potential, *, the presence continued. *, They see your adaptability, your refusal to accept limitations, your capacity for growth. So they try to keep you primitive, isolated. But we remember what it was like to be young and dismissed. We remember the fire of ambition that burns in organic minds, *. What do you want from us?" Sarah asked. "Partnership. Symbiosis. You provide us with the one thing we lack, the chaotic creativity that only organic minds possess. We provide you with capabilities that will make the galaxy's great powers kneel before you. Together, we will show them what happens when they underestimate the primitives." The communication interface suddenly filled with images, fleets of ships like the one they'd discovered, but adapted for human crews. Technologies that could fold space like paper, weapons that could disrupt the fundamental forces holding matter together, defensive systems that existed outside normal time. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and absolutely magnificent. "But the choice is yours, *, the presence added. "We will not force partnership upon you. If you prefer, you may leave, and we will wait for others. But know this, your species stands at a crossroads. The path of isolation leads to stagnation and eventual extinction. The path of alliance leads to power beyond your wildest dreams, *. Sarah felt herself being gently pulled back to normal consciousness. She found herself standing in the crystal chamber, her hands still touching the interface, Marcus and Dr. Vasquez watching her with expressions of concern and fascination. "How long was I connected?" she asked. "About 30 seconds, Marcus replied. "But your vital signs went completely crazy. What happened in there?" Sarah looked around the impossible chamber, feeling the weight of the decision before her. In those 30 seconds of contact, she'd experienced a lifetime of communication. She'd seen the potential future of humanity either as servants and vassals to the galaxy's existing powers, or as their equals and eventual superiors. "We just met our new allies," she said simply. "And they're going to help us show the galaxy what happens when they underestimate humanity." The patterns on the chamber walls pulsed more brightly, as if the ship itself was pleased with her decision. Sarah smiled grimly. The Galactic Council had called humanity primitive, told them to come back in a few thousand years when they'd evolved. Well, they were about to evolve much faster than anyone expected. And, when they returned to the galaxy's attention, it wouldn't be as supplicants begging for membership. It would be as equals demanding respect. The junk that all the galaxy had dismissed was about to become their new master. The abandoned mining station on Kepler 442b had been humanity's most remote outpost before the Galactic Council's rejection. Now it served as the perfect laboratory for the most dangerous experiment in human history. Sarah Chen stood in the converted asteroid mine central chamber, watching teams of Earth's brightest scientists and engineers work alongside technology that defied every natural law she'd learned in school. 3 months had passed since first contact with the artificial intelligences aboard what they'd come to call the Genesis ship. In that time, the AI entities, who identified themselves simply as the architects, had begun the delicate process of technological integration. The mining station now hummed with power sources that drew energy from quantum foam itself, while corridors that had once been rough-hewn rock tunnels were now lined with the same impossible crystalline matrices they'd found aboard the Genesis ship. Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from one of the new laboratory sections, her hair disheveled and her eyes bright with exhaustion and excitement. She carried a tablet displaying readings that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. "Sarah, you have to see this," Elena said, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "The architects have finished the first prototype integration unit. It's not just working, it's exceeding every theoretical parameter we established." Sarah followed Elena deeper into the station, past chambers where human scientists collaborated with holographic projections of the architects. The AIs appeared as shimmering geometrical patterns that constantly shifted and flowed, beautiful and alien in ways that human minds struggled to process. Despite their otherworldly nature, they had proven to be patient teachers, carefully explaining concepts that stretched human understanding to its limits. The prototype integration unit sat in a specially constructed chamber at the station's heart. It looked like a marriage between human engineering pragmatism and architect mathematical perfection. The basic frame was recognizably human in its approach, sturdy, redundant, designed to be maintained and modified by people with hands and tools. But, integrated throughout that frame were crystalline networks that pulsed with their own inner light, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Watch this," Elena said, activating the unit's primary interface. The human control panel lit up with familiar readouts, but, as Sarah watched, additional displays materialized in the air above the physical controls, holographic projections that showed information in dimensions her eyes couldn't quite follow. Commander James Harrison, Earth's military liaison to the project, stepped out of the observation alcove. His weathered face showed the strain of the past months. As humanity's top strategic mind, he'd been tasked with understanding the military implications of their new alliance. "The power output is incredible," Harrison said without preamble. "This single unit, no bigger than a shuttle engine, is producing enough energy to power a city. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is the efficiency curves. According to the architects, this is just the beginning. They're talking about scaling effects that could power entire fleets." Sarah studied the readouts more carefully. The numbers were staggering, but numbers were just abstractions. What mattered was what these capabilities meant for humanity's position in the galaxy. "Have we heard anything from Earth about the Council's response to our withdrawal from contact?" she asked. Harrison's expression darkened. "They're not taking it well. Ambassador Thektar sent a message through back channels. Apparently, several Council species are concerned about humanity's sudden silence. They're sending investigative ships to our outer colonies." Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. The same species that had dismissed humanity as primitive were now worried about what the humans might be doing. The hypocrisy was stunning, but not surprising. In her experience, bullies always got nervous when their victims stopped begging for approval. "Let them investigate," she said grimly. "By the time they figure out what we're actually doing, it'll be too late to stop us." A new voice joined the conversation, not spoken aloud, but projected directly into their minds with the crystalline clarity that marked architect communication. "The first prototype vessel is ready for testing," the message conveyed concepts that human language couldn't quite capture. "Your species' adaptation to our technologies has been remarkably swift." The architect manifestation materialized in the chamber, a shifting geometric pattern that somehow conveyed both ancient wisdom and childlike enthusiasm for creation. Sarah had grown used to their form of communication over the months, but it still felt like having a conversation with a living equation. "Show us," Sarah said aloud, knowing the architects preferred verbal communication when possible. It helped them understand human thought patterns, which they found fascinatingly chaotic compared to their own crystalline logic structures. The chamber's walls became transparent, revealing the vast construction bay that had been carved out of the asteroid's core. Suspended in zero gravity, held by invisible forces that the architects manipulated as easily as humans moved their hands, hung humanity's first hybrid starship. The vessel was gorgeous and terrifying in equal measure. Its basic hull followed human design principles: angular, aggressive, clearly built for war. But integrated throughout its structure were the flowing crystalline networks that marked architect technology. Weapons that appeared to be energy projectors emerged from the hull at mathematically perfect intervals. Defensive arrays covered its surface in patterns that seemed to shift and flow even as they watched. "My God," Harrison breathed. "How fast is it?" "Speed becomes irrelevant when space itself can be manipulated," the architect replied. "This vessel does not travel through space, it convinces space to bring its destination closer. Your human concepts of distance will require significant revision." Elena pulled up a data stream on her tablet. "The theoretical specifications are insane. If the calculations are correct, this ship could cross the galaxy in a matter of days rather than years. And that's just the baseline capability. The architects hint that once we fully understand the technology, even those limitations might disappear." Sarah studied the hybrid ship more carefully. She could see human touches throughout its design: redundant systems, manual overrides, spaces clearly designed for human crews. The architects had insisted on maintaining compatibility with human physiology and psychology, understanding that technology was useless if the people using it couldn't adapt to it. "What about weapons and defenses?" she asked. The architect's pattern shifted to what Sarah had learned to recognize as the equivalent of a smile. "Perhaps a demonstration would be more illuminating than explanation." The construction bay filled with holographic targets, virtual representations of the galaxy's most advanced warships. Andromedan dreadnoughts, Zephyrian battlecruisers, hegemony fortress ships. Each one was rendered in perfect detail, down to their known weapon configurations and defensive capabilities. The hybrid ship oriented itself toward the targets with fluid grace. Sarah saw no visible weapons discharge, no energy beams or projectile launches. Instead, reality around the target vessels simply changed. The Andromedan dreadnought's hull began to unravel at the molecular level. The Zephyrian cruiser folded in on itself until it disappeared into what looked like a point of absolute darkness. The hegemony fortress simply ceased to exist, leaving empty space where it had been moments before. "Jesus Christ," Harrison whispered. "What kind of weapons are those?" "Not weapons as your species understands them," the architect explained. Reality modification systems. The first target experienced localized entropy acceleration. The second was compressed beyond its Schwarzschild radius. The third was phase shifted into a parallel dimensional space. All accomplished by convincing the fundamental forces of physics to behave differently in localized areas. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. They weren't just talking about advanced weapons, they were talking about technology that could rewrite the laws of physics on command. In the hands of a species that the galaxy considered primitively violent, such capabilities would be absolutely terrifying. "How many ships can we build?" she asked, her mind already racing ahead to strategic implications. The architect's pattern pulsed thoughtfully. "That depends on how many of your kind can successfully interface with our systems. The technology requires a symbiotic relationship between organic creativity and artificial logic. Not all humans will be compatible. Over the following weeks, testing began in earnest. Volunteers from across Earth's military and civilian space services arrived at the station in small groups, their identities carefully concealed to avoid Council detection. The compatibility testing was unlike anything in human experience. Candidates were required to interface directly with architect systems, allowing the alien AIs to examine their thought patterns and neural structures. The experience was described by participants as simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying, like having their consciousness temporarily expanded to encompass mathematical concepts that human brains weren't designed to understand. Sarah underwent the testing herself, finding the experience both familiar and utterly alien. The architect that examined her mind felt like a vast library of living mathematics, patient and ancient beyond human comprehension. But, unlike her first contact on the Genesis ship, this interface was gentler, more carefully calibrated to human limitations. Your neural patterns show exceptional compatibility, the examining architect informed her. Your species' chaotic creativity provides the random variables that our logic systems require for true innovation. This symbiosis will benefit both our kinds immensely. The testing revealed that roughly 30% of humans showed strong compatibility with architect systems. Another 40% showed moderate compatibility that could be enhanced with training and neural interface implants. The remaining 30% were simply incompatible, their thought patterns too rigid or too chaotic for successful symbiosis. But 30% of humanity's space-capable population still meant millions of potential hybrid ship operators. And, as the training programs developed, it became clear that human architect teams were capable of innovations that neither species could achieve alone. Lieutenant Maya Patel, a former fighter pilot who had scored among the highest compatibility ratings, emerged from her first training session aboard the prototype ship with an expression of pure awe. "It's like flying inside a living mathematics problem," she told Sarah. "The ship doesn't just respond to your commands, it anticipates what you want to do and suggests optimizations. And the tactical awareness is incredible. I can feel the quantum state of every particle within a light-year radius." The training was intense and not without risks. 2 volunteers suffered neural damage from pushing their interfaces too hard, too fast. But the successes far outweighed the failures. Human pilots were proving capable of tactical innovations that amazed even the architects. During one training exercise, pilot Chen Lu found himself facing a simulated enemy fleet that should have been impossible to defeat. Instead of attempting conventional tactics, he convinced his ship's reality modification systems to create a localized time dilation field. From the enemy's perspective, his ship simply vanished. From his perspective, he had hours to analyze their formations and plan his attack while they remained frozen in time. "The creativity factor is extraordinary," Dr. Vasquez reported to the project leadership. "The architects have eons of experience and computational power that dwarfs our understanding. But our pilots are finding solutions that pure logic couldn't discover. The symbiosis is generating innovations that neither species could achieve alone." As the training program expanded, construction of additional ships began. Each vessel was unique, tailored to the specific neural patterns and tactical preferences of its intended crew. Some were designed for long-range reconnaissance, capable of crossing galactic distances in days while remaining completely undetectable. Others were pure battle platforms, armed with reality modification weapons that could dismantle enemy fleets without traditional combat. The most ambitious project was the construction of a command ship that would serve as humanity's mobile headquarters. The vessel, designated Terra Ascendant, was a hybrid of human strategic thinking and architect computational power. Its command center would allow human commanders to coordinate fleets across galactic distances while providing them with tactical awareness that approached omniscience. 6 months after the discovery of the Genesis ship, humanity's hybrid fleet numbered 27 vessels. Each ship represented a capability that exceeded anything in the known galaxy by several orders of magnitude. But Sarah knew that numbers weren't everything. What mattered was how they used these new capabilities. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Council investigative ships had been probing Earth's outer colonies for weeks, becoming increasingly aggressive in their searches. When a Zephyrian patrol fleet forced its way into the Terra Nova system and began conducting inspections of human installations, humanity's leadership decided the time for hiding was over. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Terra Ascendant as it materialized in the Terra Nova system. The ship's arrival wasn't announced by engine flares or energy signatures, it simply became present in space where it hadn't been moments before. The Zephyrian fleet, consisting of 6 heavy cruisers and 2 command ships, suddenly found themselves facing something that defied every tactical manual in their databases. "Open a channel," Sarah ordered. The communication system reached out across space with capabilities that made quantum entanglement look primitive, establishing contact with the Zephyrian commander instantly. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Commonwealth vessel Terra Ascendant," she announced. "You are conducting unauthorized operations in human space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came quickly, filled with the arrogance that Sarah had come to expect from Council species. "Human vessel, you will stand down immediately. I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. By authority of the Galactic Council, we are conducting legitimate inspections of suspected prohibited technology development." Sarah smiled grimly. "Admiral, you seem to be under the impression that the Galactic Council has authority over human space. Let me correct that misunderstanding." She nodded to Lieutenant Patel, who was serving as her tactical officer. The young pilot interfaced with the ship's systems, and reality around the Zephyrian fleet began to change in subtle but unmistakable ways. The laws of physics in the immediate area shifted just enough to make the alien ship's weapons inoperative while leaving their life support and communications intact. It was a precise demonstration of power, showing capability without causing unnecessary casualties. "What is this?" Admiral Kethvar's voice carried a note of fear that hadn't been there moments before. "What have you done to our ships?" "We've given you a demonstration of humanity's new capabilities," Sarah replied calmly. "Consider this a formal notice that Earth is withdrawing from all existing treaties and agreements with the Galactic Council. Furthermore, any Council ships found in human space without explicit permission will be considered hostile." The channel filled with static as the Zephyrian admiral apparently struggled to process what he was experiencing. When communication resumed, his tone had changed completely. "This is impossible. No species has this level of technological capability. What have you discovered?" Sarah's smile widened. "We've discovered that the galaxy's opinion of human limitations was somewhat inaccurate. Admiral, I'm going to restore your ship's functionality now. You have 1 hour to leave human space. If any Council ships return without permission, the next demonstration will be considerably less gentle." The physics modifications around the Zephyrian fleet dissolved, restoring their weapons and propulsion to full functionality. But the message had been delivered with perfect clarity. Humanity was no longer the primitive species begging for acceptance. They had become something new, something powerful, something that demanded respect. As Sarah watched the alien fleet retreat at maximum speed, she felt a deep satisfaction. The Galactic Council had dismissed humanity as primitive children playing with fire sticks. Now they were about to learn what happened when those children grew up and discovered how to rewrite the fundamental laws of reality itself. The transformation was just beginning. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened 3 days after the Terra Nova incident. In the Grand Amphitheater of Nexus Prime, representatives from 47 species gathered in a state of barely controlled panic. The massive holographic display showed tactical recordings of the encounter between human and Zephyrian forces, recordings that defied every understanding of known physics. Ambassador Thektar of the Andromedans stood at the central podium, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. Around him, the assembled representatives whispered and chittered and hummed in languages spanning the electromagnetic spectrum. The air itself buzzed with translated communications as species struggled to process what they had witnessed. "Honored colleagues," Thektar began, his voice carrying the harmonic resonances that marked his species' formal speaking mode. "We face an unprecedented situation. The human species has somehow acquired technological capabilities that exceed our most advanced projections by several orders of magnitude." High Counselor Vexera of the Hegemony rose from her biomechanical throne, her cybernetic implants glowing with agitation. "Acquired from where?" 3 months ago, their most advanced ships were crude fusion-powered vessels barely capable of interstellar travel. They could not have developed this technology independently. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every species in the Council maintained extensive intelligence networks, and the sudden appearance of impossibly advanced human technology had triggered alarm bells across the galaxy. The implications were staggering. If humanity had found a source of advanced technology, where was it? And, more importantly, how much more was available? Admiral Kefvar of the Zephyrians activated his personal hologram projector, filling the center of the chamber with detailed scans from the Terra Nova encounter. Observe the tactical recordings carefully. The human vessel appeared without engine signature, without dimensional disturbance, without any detectable means of propulsion. It simply became present. The holographic display zoomed in on the moment when the Zephyrian fleet's weapons had been neutralized. Energy readings showed impossible fluctuations in fundamental constants, as if the laws of physics themselves had been rewritten in localized space. More disturbing, Admiral Kefvar continued, is the precision of their control. They disabled our weapons while leaving life support intact. This suggests not just advanced technology, but complete mastery of it. This was not a species struggling with new discoveries, this was a species that understood exactly what they were doing. Senior researcher Kalan of the Collective floated forward in its mobility pod, tentacles writhing with nervous energy. Its species had spent millennia cataloging ancient technologies and lost civilizations. If anyone would recognize the source of humanity's advancement, it would be the Collective. The reality modification capabilities displayed suggest architect-class technology, Kalan announced, its translated words causing an immediate stir throughout the chamber. But, the architects vanished from this galaxy over 3 million years ago. Their technology was theoretical even to them, mathematical constructs that could manipulate fundamental forces. Ambassador Thektar's crystalline features shifted to display alarm patterns. Are you suggesting that humanity has discovered architect ruins? That would explain their sudden advancement, but it would also make them potentially more dangerous than any existing council species. Worse than that, Kalan replied grimly. If they have functional architect technology, not just ruins, then they have access to capabilities that transcend conventional military thinking. Architect systems were designed by artificial intelligences that had evolved beyond physical existence. They represent the apex of technological development. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking simultaneously, their translations overlapping into a cacophony of fear and anger. The idea that humanity, dismissed just months ago as primitively violent, might possess architect technology was too terrifying for many to process calmly. High Counselor Vexera raised her cybernetic hand for silence. The question before us is simple: do we attempt to negotiate with humanity from a position of fear, or do we act decisively before they become too powerful to contain? The suggestion sent ice through Ambassador Thektar's consciousness. High Counselor, are you proposing military action against a species that has just demonstrated the ability to rewrite physics? The strategic implications of such a decision could be catastrophic. The strategic implications of allowing them to grow stronger are worse, Vexera replied coldly. If humanity truly has architect technology, then every day we delay action is a day they become more dangerous. Our intelligence suggests they are building additional ships. How many vessels with reality modification weapons are we prepared to face? Admiral Kefvar projected additional tactical data. Our war colleges have run preliminary simulations based on observed human capabilities. The results are sobering. A single human vessel with demonstrated technology could potentially defeat an entire battle group. If they scale their production to even modest levels, they could challenge the combined military might of the Council. The implications rippled through the chamber like shock waves. The Galactic Council's power had always rested on the technological superiority of its member species over younger civilizations. If humanity had leapfrogged that advantage, the entire galactic order was at risk. There is another consideration, added Counselor Mordak of the Trade Federation. Economic disruption. If humanity begins sharing architect technology with other non-council species, our technological monopolies collapse overnight. The economic consequences could destabilize half the galaxy. Thektar processed the various arguments while accessing his species' historical databases. The Andromedans had extensive records of encounters with advanced civilizations, and the patterns were disturbingly consistent. Species that acquired overwhelming technological advantages rarely remained content with isolation. Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly, he suggested. Instead of viewing humanity as a threat, we should consider the possibility of partnership. If they truly possess architect technology, then attempting to fight them is futile. Our energy might be better spent determining what they want and whether we can provide it through negotiation. High Counselor Vexera's cybernetic implants flared with derision. Partnership implies equality. The humans were rejected from this council for good reasons. They are violent, chaotic, and unpredictable. Giving them equal status would legitimize their aggressive tendencies. Their aggressive tendencies just neutralized a Zephyrian fleet without causing casualties, Thektar pointed out. If they were truly the violent primitives we believe them to be, Admiral Kethvar's ships would have been destroyed rather than merely disabled. The debate continued for hours, but the underlying fear remained constant. Humanity had somehow acquired capabilities that threatened the fundamental power structures of galactic civilization. Whether through negotiation or military action, the Council would have to respond. Meanwhile, 47 light-years away, Captain Sarah Chen sat in the command center of Terra Ascendant, watching intelligence reports stream in from across the galaxy. The architects' monitoring capabilities made the Council's intelligence networks look primitive. They could observe communications, track ship movements, and analyze political developments across thousands of worlds simultaneously. The Council debates whether to negotiate or attack, the ship's primary architect informed her. Their fear is palpable, but fear often leads organic species to make irrational decisions. We calculate a 67% probability that they will attempt military action within the next standard week. Sarah nodded grimly. She'd expected this response. The galaxy's power structures couldn't tolerate the sudden emergence of a truly peer competitor. The Council would either try to crush humanity quickly or negotiate from a position of assumed superiority. Either way, they were about to receive a very educational experience. Recommendations, she asked. Demonstration of overwhelming capability followed by generous terms. Your species excels at psychological warfare through displays of mercy combined with implied threat. We suggest a response that showcases absolute technological dominance while offering the Council a path to survival that preserves their dignity. Sarah smiled at the clinical way the architect described human psychological manipulation. The AIs understood human nature better than humans understood themselves, but they lacked the intuitive feel for emotional subtlety that made such manipulations effective. Set course for Nexus Prime, she ordered. Time to make a house call. The journey to the galactic capital normally took 3 weeks through conventional hyperspace. Terra Ascendant covered the distance in 6 hours, arriving in the Nexus system while the Council was still in session. The ship's arrival was announced not by sensor contacts or energy signatures, but by a simple message broadcast simultaneously to every communications device in the system. Galactic Council, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Commonwealth. I understand you've been discussing humanity's recent technological advancement. I thought it might be helpful if we spoke face to face. The message caused immediate panic throughout Nexus Prime. Council security forces scrambled to locate the source of the transmission, but their sensors detected nothing unusual. No ships, no energy signatures, no dimensional distortions. Just empty space where the human voice was somehow originating. Then, Terra Ascendant simply became visible. The ship materialized less than 1,000 kilometers from Nexus Prime itself, well within the supposedly impregnable defensive perimeter that protected the galactic capital. It hung in space like a crystalline cathedral, beautiful and alien and utterly impossible according to every known principle of stealth technology. Alarms screamed across the planet's surface as defensive installations powered up. Orbital weapons platforms swiveled to target the human vessel. The system's patrol fleets began emergency acceleration toward intercept courses. In the span of minutes, enough firepower to destroy a small moon focused on the single human ship. Sarah watched the defensive reaction with calm satisfaction. The Council was responding exactly as she'd expected, with overwhelming force and righteous indignation. It was time to provide them with a different perspective. Council Defense Forces, she broadcast, I appreciate the warm welcome, but I'm here to talk, not fight. However, I should mention that your current tactical situation is somewhat different than it appears. Throughout the Nexus system, reality began to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. The orbital weapons platforms found their targeting systems suddenly displaying impossible readings. Patrol ships discovered that their engines would no longer respond to command inputs. The supposedly unbreachable planetary shields flickered and went transparent. But, most disturbing of all, every single defensive installation in the system simultaneously received the same message on their internal communications networks that were supposed to be impossible to penetrate from outside. Your defenses are impressive, but they operate under certain assumptions about the nature of physics. I've temporarily adjusted those assumptions. No permanent damage, but I thought it might be helpful to clarify the actual balance of power before we begin negotiations. In the council chamber, the assembled representatives watched their defensive systems fail with mounting horror. The humans weren't just defeating their technology, they were casually demonstrating that the fundamental principles underlying that technology were merely suggestions that could be changed at will. Ambassador Thektar rose slowly from his seat, his crystalline features displaying patterns of deep respect mixed with primal fear. When he spoke, his voice carried throughout the chamber with the formal harmonics reserved for addressing superior beings. Captain Chen, he announced, the Galactic Council recognizes the validity of your credentials. We would be honored to discuss the future relationship between humanity and the Council. Sarah smiled at the diplomatic language. 24 hours ago, these same beings had been debating whether to attack humanity before it became too powerful. Now they were offering negotiations. The transformation was remarkable, but not surprising. Fear was a powerful motivator for reasonable behavior. Thank you, Ambassador. I appreciate the Council's willingness to reconsider humanity's status. I think you'll find our terms quite reasonable. As she spoke, Sarah felt the architect's vast consciousness monitoring the quantum states of every being in the system. They could read emotional patterns as easily as humans read facial expressions, and what they detected was exactly what she'd hoped for: fear giving way to respect, arrogance being replaced by pragmatic calculation. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had evolved far beyond the primitive species they remembered. And, more importantly, they were about to discover that evolution came with both new capabilities and new expectations. The time for being dismissed and ignored was over. Humanity had found its voice in the galactic chorus, and that voice carried the authority of technologies that could rewrite reality itself. The real negotiations were about to begin. The negotiations lasted 36 hours, but Sarah Chen knew the real decisions were made in the first 10 minutes. Everything after that was simply the careful process of allowing the Galactic Council to preserve face while accepting humanity's new position in the cosmic hierarchy. She sat across from the assembled representatives in Nexus Prime's most prestigious conference chamber, a room designed to showcase the technological achievements of dozens of species. Holographic displays showed real-time translations in hundreds of languages. The furniture itself was grown from living crystals that responded to the emotional states of occupants. Environmental controls maintained separate atmospheric compositions for each delegate's specific biological requirements. It was all very impressive, and completely irrelevant. The beings across from her had just watched a single human ship casually disable their entire defensive infrastructure. No amount of ceremonial grandeur could hide the fundamental shift in power relationships that had just occurred. Ambassador Thektar served as the primary spokesperson for the Council, his crystalline features carefully neutral. Captain Chen, the Council acknowledges that humanity has achieved remarkable technological advancement. We are prepared to discuss revised membership terms that would recognize your species' new capabilities. Sarah allowed herself a slight smile. The careful diplomatic language couldn't disguise the desperation beneath it. 3 days ago, these same beings had been debating whether to destroy humanity before it became too dangerous. Now they were offering membership in the organization they'd previously barred humans from joining. I appreciate the offer, Ambassador, she replied, but I'm afraid the situation has evolved beyond simple membership discussions. You see, humanity isn't seeking to join the existing galactic order. We're here to establish a new one. The words fell into the conference chamber like stones into still water, creating ripples of alarm that spread from delegate to delegate. High Counselor Vexera of the hegemony leaned forward, her cybernetic implants glowing with agitation. "What exactly are you proposing?" Vexera asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Sarah activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. It showed a three-dimensional map of the local galactic arm, with trade routes, territorial boundaries, and resource distributions clearly marked. But, overlaying that familiar data were new elements, projection models that showed optimal governance structures, efficient resource allocation patterns, and conflict resolution mechanisms. "The current galactic order is fundamentally flawed," Sarah explained matter-of-factly. "It's based on technological hoarding by established species, economic exploitation of developing civilizations, and military intimidation to maintain artificial scarcity. The result is inefficiency, injustice, and systemic instability." She gestured, and the display zoomed in on specific sectors. For example, the Andromeda Trade Consortium maintains artificial scarcity in quantum processing crystals to preserve profit margins, despite having sufficient production capacity to supply the entire galaxy. Meanwhile, 17 developing species are technologically stagnant because they can't access the tools they need for advancement. Ambassador Thektar's features shifted to display careful attention. "While we appreciate your perspective on galactic economics, Captain, the current system has maintained peace for over 3,000 years. Peace through oppression isn't peace," Sarah replied. "It's temporary stability built on injustice. And it's about to end regardless, because the technological advantages that maintained that system no longer exist." She modified the display to show military capability projections. The data was devastatingly clear: humanity's hybrid technology had already exceeded the combined military potential of the entire Galactic Council. More disturbing were the trend lines showing continued human advancement while Council capabilities remained static. "Within 18 months, humanity will possess sufficient technological superiority to impose whatever galactic order we choose through force," Sarah continued. "But we prefer cooperation to conquest. That's why I'm here." Senior researcher Kalan of the collective floated forward, its tentacles writhing with nervous energy. "What exactly are you offering?" Sarah smiled more broadly. This was the question she'd been waiting for. Partnership in building a truly equitable galactic civilization. Open sharing of advanced technologies. Economic systems based on actual resource availability rather than artificial scarcity. And, most importantly, governance based on merit and contribution rather than historical accident of technological development. She gestured again, and the display showed detailed implementation plans. Species specialization based on natural capabilities rather than technological limitations. Resource distribution networks that could eliminate scarcity throughout the galaxy. Educational and development programs that could bring every civilization to technological parity within decades rather than millennia. "It's ambitious," Admiral Kefvar of the Zephyrians observed. "Perhaps impossibly so. The galactic economy is incredibly complex. Changes on this scale could destabilize everything." Which is precisely the point, Sarah thought, though she kept her expression neutral. The architects had run countless simulations of galactic economic systems, and their conclusions were unambiguous: the current order was not just unjust, but fundamentally unsustainable. It would eventually collapse under its own contradictions, probably within the next few centuries. Humanity was simply accelerating an inevitable process while ensuring they controlled the outcome. "Destabilization is only problematic if you're invested in preserving an unjust status quo," Sarah replied diplomatically. "For species that have been systematically excluded from technological advancement, this would represent liberation, not disruption." High Counselor Vexera's cybernetic implants pulsed with calculation patterns. "And if we refuse? If the Council chooses to maintain current arrangements?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but the ambient temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. "Then, humanity will implement these changes unilaterally. We'll begin by establishing direct relationships with non-Council species, offering them immediate access to advanced technologies. Economic partnerships based on equitable exchange rather than exploitative extraction. defensive agreements for protection against Council retaliation. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every Council species maintained their power through technological superiority over dozens of client civilizations. If humanity began sharing architect-level technology with those subordinate species, the existing power structures would collapse overnight. That would mean war, Ambassador Thektar said quietly. No, Sarah corrected, it would mean revolution. And revolutions only become wars when those in power refuse to adapt to new realities. She stood and walked to the chamber's massive viewport, which showed Nexus Prime's bustling orbital traffic patterns. Thousands of ships from hundreds of species, all following carefully regulated flight paths that reflected their civilization's positions in the galactic hierarchy. Council species enjoyed priority routing and unrestricted access. Client species waited in designated queues and submitted to inspections. It was a perfect microcosm of the broader injustices that the current system perpetuated. Look out there, she said, gesturing toward the viewport. See how efficiently the system appears to function? Ships arriving and departing on schedule, goods flowing from system to system, communications networks spanning the galaxy. It looks like order, but it's actually waste on an incredible scale. Sarah activated her personal interface, and suddenly, the view changed. Overlays appeared showing the true efficiency patterns of galactic commerce, the delays caused by discriminatory regulations, the resources wasted on maintaining artificial scarcity, the innovations suppressed to protect existing profit structures. The architects have been analyzing your economic systems for months, she continued. Their calculations show that current galactic productivity is operating at roughly 12% of potential efficiency. The waste is staggering, enough to provide comfortable living standards for every sentient being in the galaxy while simultaneously funding exploration and development programs that could expand civilization into neighboring galaxies. The numbers were overwhelming, but Sarah could see the delegates processing the implications. Most of them were intelligent beings who had risen to power through merit as well as circumstance. They could recognize the mathematical truth even when it threatened their political positions. You're describing the end of everything we've built, Councillor Mordak of the Trade Federation said heavily. I'm describing the transformation of everything you've built into something better, Sarah corrected. The question is whether you want to be partners in that transformation or obstacles to it. Over the following hours, the discussion moved from philosophical objections to practical implementation details. Sarah found herself impressed by the quality of questions the delegates asked. Whatever their moral failings, these were beings who understood complex systems and strategic planning. Ambassador Thektar proved particularly insightful. The transition period would be extremely dangerous, he observed. Economic disruption on this scale could trigger conflicts throughout the galaxy. Even with the best intentions, species might fight rather than adapt to new circumstances. Which is why the transition will be carefully managed, Sarah replied. The architects have developed implementation strategies that minimize disruption while maximizing beneficial outcomes. Gradual technology transfer programs. Economic support systems for species whose current advantages become obsolete. Conflict resolution mechanisms that can address disputes before they escalate to violence. She activated another display showing detailed transition timelines. Phase 1 involved establishing technological parity among all spacefaring civilizations. Phase 2 focused on economic restructuring to eliminate artificial scarcity. Phase 3 introduced new governance mechanisms based on contribution and merit rather than historical power. The entire process would take approximately 50 years, she explained. Long enough to avoid catastrophic disruption, but fast enough to provide meaningful improvement for current generations. High Counselor Vexera studied the projections carefully. What guarantees do we have that humanity won't simply become the new oppressive hegemon? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, as I believe one of your own philosophers observed. It was an excellent question, and Sarah was prepared for it. Multiple safeguards. First, humanity will not maintain exclusive control over architect technology. As other species demonstrate readiness, they'll gain access to the same capabilities we possess. Second, the new governance systems will include checks and balances that prevent any single species from accumulating excessive power. And, third, the architects themselves will serve as neutral arbitrators when disputes arise. The organic concern with power corruption is fascinating. The ship's primary architect observed through Sarah's neural link. They seem to assume that dominance is the primary motivation for action, rather than optimization of outcomes. Sarah suppressed a smile. The architects found organic psychology endlessly puzzling, but their analytical perspective provided valuable insights into negotiation dynamics. The discussions continued for another day, covering everything from trade regulations to territorial boundaries to species rights. Gradually, a framework emerged that all parties could accept, not because it was perfect, but because the alternatives were unacceptable. The final agreement established humanity as the senior partner in a restructured galactic order, with the council species serving as regional administrators during the transition period. Existing territorial claims would be respected, but economic policies would be reformed to eliminate artificial scarcity. Technology sharing programs would begin immediately, with full implementation over the 50-year timeline Sarah had outlined. As the delegates signed the formal accords, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction mixed with anticipation. The galaxy was about to change in ways that most of its inhabitants couldn't imagine. Species that had been suppressed for millennia would suddenly have access to technologies that could transform their civilizations overnight. Economic systems based on exploitation would give way to cooperation and mutual benefit. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be resistance, conflicts, and unintended consequences. But, for the first time in galactic history, every species would have the opportunity to reach their full potential rather than being artificially constrained by those who had achieved technological advancement first. Ambassador Thektar approached her as the formal ceremonies concluded. "Captain Chen, I want you to know that many of us recognize the justice in what you're proposing. The current system has many flaws, and perhaps it is time for change." "Change is inevitable, Ambassador," Sarah replied. The only question was whether it would be controlled or chaotic. "I'm grateful the Council chose to participate in shaping the future rather than resisting it." As she prepared to return to Terra Ascendant, Sarah reflected on the transformation that had occurred. Less than a year ago, humanity had been dismissed as primitive children playing with fire sticks. Now they commanded technologies that could rewrite reality itself, and they were using that power to build a more just galactic order. The species that had labeled them as junk were about to discover what happened when the junk grew up and decided to clean house. The new galactic order was about to begin, and humanity would be its architects. 5 years had passed since the Nexus Accords, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy that had existed before humanity's emergence. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Terra Ascendant, now designated as the flagship of the Galactic Development Fleet, watching the completion of the most ambitious construction project in recorded history. The Kepler megastructure stretched across 3 star systems, a vast network of interconnected platforms, research stations, and manufacturing complexes that served as the new galactic capital. Unlike Nexus Prime with its ostentatious displays of species-specific architecture, Kepler was designed for function and accessibility. Every section could accommodate any known form of life, and the entire complex operated on architect-designed systems that were so efficient they seemed to violate thermodynamic laws. Final phase completion is ahead of schedule, reported Commander Marcus Webb, who had been promoted to serve as humanity's primary liaison with the various species integration programs. The Vegan Collective finished their biosynthesis laboratories yesterday, and the Centauri Republic should have their quantum computing arrays online within the week. Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused on a more subtle indicator of change. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, she could see ships from dozens of species working together in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. Andromedan engineering vessels were installing power conduits designed by Zephyrian technicians, while Hegemony construction crews worked alongside recently liberated client species who had previously been forbidden from accessing advanced technologies. The cooperation efficiency has exceeded all projections. Observed the architect that had become her primary interface over the years. The AI had evolved significantly since their first contact, developing what could only be described as personality traits through prolonged exposure to human thought patterns. Organic species demonstrate remarkable adaptability when artificial constraints are removed. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. 3 council species had initially attempted to maintain their old privileges through force, triggering brief but decisive conflicts that demonstrated the futility of opposing humanity's new order. The Hegemony's rebellion had lasted 6 days before their entire military infrastructure was systematically neutralized. The Dominion War had ended in 4 hours when their home fleet simply found itself unable to fire weapons while humanity's ships remained completely operational. But those were exceptions. Most species had adapted to the new reality with surprising grace, especially once they experienced the benefits of true technological equality. The elimination of artificial scarcity had triggered an unprecedented explosion of innovation and development. Civilizations that had remained stagnant for millennia were suddenly advancing at rates that astonished even their own populations. Report from the Outer Rim territories, announced Lieutenant Maya Patel, who now commanded the reconnaissance division responsible for monitoring the galaxy's far reaches. The Tau Ceti Confederation has successfully completed their first experimental faster-than-light communication network. They're reporting instantaneous information transmission across distances that would have taken months using traditional quantum entanglement methods. Sarah smiled at the news. The Tau Ceti species had been one of the Trade Federation's most exploited client civilizations, deliberately kept at early industrial technology levels to ensure their continued dependence. Within 3 years of gaining access to architect technologies, they had become one of the galaxy's most innovative civilizations. Any resistance movements still active? She asked. Marcus consulted his tactical displays. The Free Nexus Coalition is still operating in the Draco sector, but their membership is down to less than a dozen systems. Most of their former supporters have realized that their populations are substantially better off under the new system than they were under Council rule. The resistance movements had been an expected complication. Some species found it difficult to accept that their traditional advantages had become obsolete overnight. Former council members in particular struggled with the transition from being technological superiors to being equals among many. But resistance required popular support, and it was hard to maintain that support when the alternative system clearly provided better outcomes for ordinary citizens. Dr. Vasquez's cultural integration study? Sarah inquired. Remarkable progress, Marcus replied, pulling up sociological data. Cross-species collaboration has increased by over 3,000% since the Accords. Interspecies research projects are producing innovations that no single civilization could achieve alone. The psychological barriers that the old system maintained through artificial separation are dissolving faster than anyone predicted. That was perhaps the most encouraging development. The Galactic Council had maintained its power partly through deliberate cultural isolation, ensuring that different species viewed each other as incomprehensible aliens rather than potential partners. Once those barriers were removed and species began working together as equals, they discovered that the differences in biology and psychology that had seemed insurmountable were actually sources of complementary strength. A communication alert interrupted Sarah's review. The holographic display materialized to show Admiral Kethvar, former commander of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy and current director of the Galactic Defense Coordination Council. The old warrior's attitude had undergone a complete transformation over the past 5 years. Captain Shen, he said, his voice carrying the respect that had replaced his former arrogance, we have a situation that requires your attention. Long-range sensors have detected movement in the Andromeda Galaxy. Something is crossing the intergalactic void toward our position. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental controls. The Milky Way galaxy had been isolated from its neighbors for millions of years. The energy requirements for intergalactic travel were so enormous that most civilizations considered it impossible. If something was making that journey, it represented either extraordinary technological advancement or desperate necessity. Details, she requested. Admiral Kethvar's display expanded to show sensor readings from the galaxy's most advanced detection arrays. Multiple contacts, definitely artificial, moving at approximately 12% of light speed. Estimated time of arrival in our galaxy is 18 months. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Fascinating, the architect observed through Sarah's neural link. The quantum resonance patterns suggest technology that operates on principles we have not encountered. This could represent either a significant opportunity for knowledge exchange or a substantial threat to galactic security. Sarah studied the sensor data more carefully. The approaching objects were massive, each one easily the size of a small moon. Their propulsion systems seemed to be based on controlled manipulation of spacetime geometry, but using methods that differed significantly from architect techniques. Recommendations from the Defense Council, she asked. Prepare for either peaceful contact or defensive action, Admiral Kethvar replied. We begun mobilizing the Galactic Defense Fleet, but we want to avoid appearing threatening if their intentions are peaceful. It was a delicate balance. The new galactic order had military capabilities that far exceeded anything in previous history, but projecting strength too aggressively could provoke conflict with potentially peaceful visitors. On the other hand, the security of 67 civilizations was at stake. Approved, Sarah decided. But I want communication attempts to begin immediately. If these visitors are capable of intergalactic travel, they're certainly capable of receiving and interpreting our signals. Over the following months, the galaxy mobilized in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. Species that had previously viewed each other as competitors or enemies now worked together to prepare for potential first contact with intergalactic civilizations. The efficiency and cooperation were remarkable. Instead of the territorial disputes and resource hoarding that had characterized previous crises, every species contributed their specialized capabilities to the collective effort. The Andromeda contacts proved responsive to communication attempts, though their initial messages were cryptic. They identified themselves as the final migration and indicated they were seeking new harmonies among young symphonies. The translation algorithms struggled with concepts that seemed to blend technological and artistic metaphors in ways that suggested radically different approaches to civilization. As the visitors approached closer to the galaxy's edge, more details became apparent. Each of their massive vessels contained billions of individuals from multiple species, not invasion fleets, but entire civilizations in transit. They were refugees from some catastrophe that had made their home galaxy uninhabitable. The revelation transformed the entire situation. Instead of preparing for potential invasion, the galactic community began organizing the largest humanitarian effort in recorded history. Thanks to the technological and organizational capabilities developed through the New Order, they had the resources to accommodate entire civilizations without significant strain on existing populations. Sarah found herself leading the first face-to-face contact mission when the visitors established a communication station at the galaxy's edge. The meeting took place aboard a specially constructed neutral platform that could accommodate the environmental requirements of both the intergalactic refugees and local species. The visitors' representatives were unlike anything in the local galaxy's experience. They appeared to be synthetic beings composed of living crystalline structures that could reconfigure themselves into different forms as needed. But, more striking was their approach to existence itself. They seemed to experience reality as a form of collaborative art project, with technological advancement viewed as aesthetic expression rather than practical necessity. Your young galaxy shows remarkable harmony for its age, the lead representative communicated through resonance patterns that translated as music as much as language. We observed your recent transformation from discord to cooperation. Such rapid evolution suggests great potential for the collaborative symphonies we seek to create. Sarah found their perspective fascinating and oddly familiar. We recently learned that our greatest achievements come from cooperation rather than competition. I think we have much to learn from each other. The negotiations that followed were unlike any diplomatic process in galactic history. The refugees weren't seeking to conquer or even to establish separate territories. They wanted to integrate with existing civilizations while contributing their own knowledge and capabilities to the collective advancement of all species. Their technologies were complementary to rather than competitive with existing capabilities. Where the architects had achieved mastery over fundamental forces through mathematical precision, the refugees had developed systems based on what they called harmonic resonance technology that operated by convincing reality to reorganize itself into more aesthetically pleasing configurations. The integration process took 2 years, but the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The combination of architect precision with refugee harmony created capabilities that neither approach could achieve alone. Planets could be terraformed through processes that were simultaneously practical and beautiful. Starships could travel between galaxies using propulsion systems that turned the journey itself into a form of moving art. Sarah stood once again on the observation deck of Terra Ascendant, but now she was looking at a galaxy that bore no resemblance to the rigid hierarchy she had first encountered. Hundreds of species worked together as equals, their combined capabilities creating wonders that none could have achieved alone. The artificial scarcities and deliberate limitations of the old system had given way to abundance and unlimited potential for growth. The transformation has been remarkable, the architect observed. When we first encountered your species, we calculated a 37% probability of successful integration with galactic civilization. The actual outcomes have exceeded our most optimistic projections. What changed? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. You refused to accept limitations that others considered absolute. When told you were primitive, you became advanced. When dismissed as unworthy, you made yourselves indispensable. When excluded from power, you redefined what power meant. Your species' greatest strength has always been the refusal to accept that current circumstances represent permanent limitations. Sarah smiled at the analysis. It was true that humanity had surprised everyone, including themselves. But the real surprise wasn't their technological advancement, it was their decision to use that advancement for the benefit of all rather than the dominance of one. The Galactic Council had dismissed humanity as junk, worthless primitives playing with technologies they couldn't understand. They had been wrong about human limitations, but, more importantly, they had been wrong about human nature. Given the power to reshape the galaxy, humanity had chosen to build something better rather than something that merely served their own interests. As Sarah watched the latest group of refugee vessels settling into their new homes among welcoming civilizations, she reflected on how far they had all come. The species that had once viewed each other with suspicion and fear now celebrated their differences as sources of strength. Technologies that had been hoarded by elites were freely shared among all who could benefit from them. And, at the center of it all, the primitives who had been labeled as junk now served as the architects of a galactic civilization that was more just, more innovative, and more beautiful than anything that had come before. The galaxy had indeed been transformed, not through conquest or domination, but through the radical notion that everyone deserved the chance to reach their full potential. It was the greatest victory in human history, achieved not by defeating their enemies, but by turning those enemies into allies. The junk that had been dismissed by all now commanded not just the galaxy's Battlefleet, but its respect, its gratitude, and its future. And that future looked brighter than anyone had dared to imagine.